Is it going?
2, yes. Okay, we're going. All right.
Okay.
So,
Gene Cunningham here, attorney and GOODELL, pastor, talking about Aristotelian ethics.
and lots of other subject matters.
And lots of
yeah,
others.
this is my little chart. I guess we ought to get a board to write on the board. So we did part 1, part 2, and I'm just kind of not happy with the viewers trying to figure out what the hell we're talking about. Is that,
Mm-hmm.
So, and what we're purposely doing is we're not being academic. We have a outline here, but we're not going through it and defining words. But I think we have to get a real good concept of the language we're using right now for the people who are watching over there. Mine's over there.
Mm-hmm.
So all right. This is what I wrote. Virtue is excellence. What did you get from that? This is Aristotle.
Yeah, from the Aristotle, the lecture series this man did here, is that virtue is actually part of the total picture, so that you have knowledge, you have wisdom, you have understanding, you have all of these different things. And basically what he does is he views virtue as a collection of things rather than an individual idea. Today we would tend to think of an idea maybe like, morality and things like that.
I think that's what I was getting at, because
he includes it in there, but it's not.
But this is my take. It's confusing for Westerners to use the word virtue, because we're talking about somebody who's morally correct, virtue.
Right.
But that's not what Aristotle's talking about. To him, and we have to go by what he's saying, because this is what the Greeks thought.
Mm-hmm.
We can't impose our own thoughts on the past, which is a favorite pastime today of all kinds of alleged intellectuals. So virtue I got out of this is excellence.
Mm-hmm.
So you could be excellent carpenter,
Right,
and your discipline is excellent. And what this is, I think this is what's the boundary I have is, he's not coming from the point of that there is a truth, there's a Bible, there's a God, you must follow these rules. He's not coming from that. He's trying to determine from people, from tradition, customs, what it is that makes someone ethical.
Mm-hmm.
So he's putting aside the idea of being virtuous because you were told to do certain things, and trying to find a virtue in what you do. So you start with, I guess, an honest life, a sincere life, where you're actually good at what you're doing. And it doesn't mean you're great. I mean, you could be good at washing cars. It's okay. But that to me is the thing that can throw you off if you're thinking about virtue. And this is a scientific view he has. Mm-hmm. He basically created the scientific method. The way that everybody who's watching this thinks is a Western way of thought, and it's based upon science, which means cause and effect. So we all think this way. People didn't always think this way. Aristotle had to basically impose this logic on people.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had to find things that based on other things. So he would actually find out, he's actually starting from himself. He's saying, what's happy? What makes people happy? What's good? And then from there, trying to ask other people to try to come up with some kind of a scientific strata of what's good and why is it good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we're starting with ethics, which is different from, say, the biblicist's point of view. What else do I have?
Well, I want to say something.
Yeah, please.
About that idea of virtue that you said there. The concept that he's talking about here, that it's not just simply a moral thing, but it extends to other areas of your life.
Yes.
Okay. In Proverbs 31, a virtuous woman who can find, because her price is far above rubies. And then for the whole rest of the chapter, it describes everything, including her morality. But she works with her hands. She goes out and brings food from afar. She finds a piece of land and invests in it. She handles responsibility at home so her husband can be a political leader at the gate. And it lists all these things. And the Hebrew word for virtue means multifaceted. So the whole concept is that a virtuous woman is not just a moral woman, but a woman with many facets that can contribute to the happiness of her own home. I think there's a parallel between Aristotle and Proverbs 31.
This is going to take me time off screen to think about this one.
That's okay.
Okay. And again, and of course, Aristotle, I don't know this for a fact, but I assume he read the Old Testament.
Albeit, yeah, you would think maybe.
Yeah, it was 300 BC. The Hebrews were all over the place. So I would think so. But he didn't use that as, they had a term for it. They had a term for it for a edict-based morality. My theory is, if there's an edict-based morality, and what I came up with this theory thinking about Islam. If you're doing something because you're told to do it, and if you don't do it, you're going to have your hands chopped off or you're going to be killed, that's not morality.
No.
That's not morality at all.
It's actually immorality.
Well, there you go.
In my judgment, yeah.
And ethics is making a determination and living somehow in a scientific, virtuous way, which is where we're going to go in and out of that as we talk about other cultures and traditions. I love this word, eudaimonia.
Eudaimonia.
Eudaimonia, thank
Yeah,
you.
eudaimonia, yeah.
It means good spirit or genuine good. We should have T-shirts.
Mm-hmm.
Eudaimonia.
Right.
And again, he's trying to find what is genuine good. He's not telling you what's good. He's basically asking you what's good,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to categorize it. He invented biological categorization, species, all this stuff. He's got a logical way of thinking. The way that you think, the way that you do your computer work, the way that you do your work is Aristotelian. There are very few non-Aristotelians around here. I work at it, but it's not easy. All right, it's kind of more of the. Let's not get into that. So anyway, happiness I wrote down is an end.
Yeah, he mentions that here.
So you had something to say about that.
Well, based on the idea of if you take Aristotelian, the mean here, first of all, you go back to what we looked at earlier about virtue and ethics. If you put that together, that's a package. So that package contains a lot of elements within it. You can't just say virtue, you can't just say, and so when he looks at happiness as an end, it's a result of how that virtue functions in your life. So if the virtue is not actually functioning in your life, you're not going to have the happiness. He mentions, the author mentions two things here about his analysis of Aristotle. He uses, he refers to rationality as a distinction between the human animal, he calls it, and a non-human animal. And he says that Aristotle refers to rationality in all-inclusive sense of knowing and choosing. And then he makes this distinction. He says knowing includes not only cerebral functions, like the brain articulating, calculating, but he said it also has practical aspects like carpentry, as you mentioned, child rearing, arts, and other things. And he says these are a natural part of the human functioning, but he said they have to be developed. So what he's indicating there is if you look at virtue as a multifaceted expression of your desire for happiness, reaching out to accomplish these things, then he says what's going to happen is you have to make a choice. So the rationality involved in choosing refers to a whole range of things, including your personal desires, your passions, your emotions, and the practice of making and selecting among things which you are attracted to or repelled by. And he says the result is human happiness ought to include such things as a long enough life of reasonable health, material prosperity, friends, honor, respect, and to go down through it to develop our native powers into a peak excellence. So that goes along with that Proverbs 31 woman. When it gets to the end and describes her, it says that her children praise her and her husband arises and calls her excellent because of her multifacetedness. So if you look at Aristotelian concept of virtue, then in that package of virtue is all this other stuff that he's talking about here.
Yes.
You can't separate it from happiness. You can't separate it from knowing. Can't separate it from choosing, right?
So we're actually, there's two things. The first thing that popped into mind when we were talking was in Genesis, the apple is actually the knowledge of good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
And this wasn't an apple. If anybody thinks it's an apple, go back and check your Genesis.
It just says fruit.
Fruit? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
fruit. But it's the knowledge of good and evil, which is the item, like Aristotle would agree with this, that separated us from the more bovine of mammals walking around having a good time in Eden.
Right.
There was no bad times there. Everybody was having a good time. And at one point, Eva and Adama, is that correct?
Adam
Adam and Eve? Adama? Anyway,
Yeah.
Adam and Eve became aware through consciousness. I always key on consciousness personally. I think that's the magic term to use.
Yeah.
They became conscious and they put their fig leaves on, and they were asked, like, well, how come you think this is wrong? This is interwoven with the whole concept of ethics and with virtue and with finding a purpose in life. And if you're busy doing something well, then you can seek happiness. You can be happy. And this is so Japanese that it's extraordinary. The whole point of 1,000 years of Japanese culture is that each person should do their best.
Mm-hmm.
And they say that. If they're doing a job, they say, well, all I can do is I will do my personal best. This is exactly what Aristotle, I believe, would agree with. So, this virtue is becoming way more personal and interactive, and you have to make decisions than it is following a law.
Mm-hmm.
That's not virtue. That, to me, yes.
Oh, yeah.
You think it's even immoral because you're just doing what like Putin tells you to do.
Yeah. And you mentioned something earlier too about, and I think one of the previous videos about the society in which we live and the need for a moral code. And Aristotle would agree with that, because if you're going to have a society in which people are happy, then you have to have individuals in the society that are happy. Yeah. So you got to have something that appeals to everybody in the way that, well, he mentions this, I don't know if you saw this or not. He says, in the larger context, ethics is really partly the study of politics. And he uses the Greek word polis for city there. And it reminds me of Plato's Republic, where yes. Plato has whole sections where he talks about individual aspects that have to be true
right.
in order for the city system, the policies to work and function. Yeah. Did you notice this right here? He said basically, when you get right down to what you were talking about earlier, what you're looking for is what is truly good for human beings. So my question there is, if you were going to decide what is true for human beings, wouldn't you have to have some kind of standard or moral code that you're talking about that's agreed upon by people in a society?
That's exactly the question I get from Aristotle.
Mm-hmm.
We come from the Western perspective, and we come from there are proper ways to live.
Mm-hmm.
There are moral codes. He's trying to find what these moral codes are, and this is kind of like it's like interfering with your brain. It's like, well, what do you mean? He won't disagree necessarily, but he wants to assess and build a platform by which we can all understand what is virtue, what is good, what is happiness,
mm-hmm.
and it's a different way of looking at things, and it doesn't have either the blessing or the negativity of rules.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and if you, on the other hand, if you personally adopt rules as your own rules, that's fine. But if you're just following rules because you can have your head cut off, that's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's nothing. It's just negative.
Right.
All right. So, and then also the other thing I wanted to mention, I've mentioned this occasionally, is that a healthy community, a good culture, a polis, requires individuals to work hard to become virtuous in their own area, and to be trusting and to trust one another. If you do not trust one another, there is no community.
Mm-hmm.
This is that simple, and that's where we're heading in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least we're being driven that way. I don't think it's going to happen because the people are a little too smart. But if you do not trust one another, then there is no economy. There's no culture, and you wind up defending your house.
Yeah, and of course, what we are now in the United States in a position where you could not describe the entire country as a country of happiness in the Aristotelian sense because of the direction that we've taken. But I wanted you to notice what this lecturer says here. He says that part of the significance of Aristotle's work is to start us in the direction of identifying human happiness as the goal in life, and to give us a good procedure for justifying this view in the face of those who argue that the goal of ethics is pleasure or honor or wealth. So he's saying the goal in life is happiness, but that's not just simply pleasure, honor, and wealth. It's all of the other things working together. So to him, as you mentioned here on your note, happiness would be, in his definition of happiness, would be the end. Yeah. And that's what he's trying to get us to move toward.
And every time we discuss Aristotle or anybody, it always comes down to the use of words. What does he mean by happiness?
Right, yeah.
You know, and it's different from what we think of as happiness. In fact, I have this conversation with many people all the time, is that our consideration of happiness is actually bad. If you go back to the Tao, happiness can only be created when there's unhappiness. Mm-hmm. There's a yin-yang to everything in the universe. So if you're striving to feel good, you've just created feeling bad.
Yeah.
And this probably is like pushing the limits of a lot of people. But I think this is a fair observation. So what I always recommend is contentment. I like the word contentment. You should seek contentment. Because happiness has this feeling in our culture of being a moron. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like you can go and get alcohol and be happy.
Right, yeah.
You know, Aristotle would say that's not the kind of happiness he means.
Yeah, no, it's not. His is a happiness of balance, which goes along with this concept of the golden mean.
That's right.
Do what is right, but you have to, and he would agree, you would have to have a standard for deciding what is right. That would be why he would focus on the ethical part. The biblical concept of happiness is a little different. The biblical concept of happiness in Psalm chapter 1, the word blessed in the Hebrew is actually means, oh, the happinesses of. The word blessed means.
Okay, blessed means the happiness.
Oh, the happinesses of. It's the picture of a fountain that's overflowing and constantly satisfied.
Okay.
So Psalm 1 starts out, blessed is the man, or oh, the happinesses of man, who walketh not in the way of sinners, and standeth not in the way of scorners, and sitteth not, with the ungodly. And then he goes down and describes that the person who places his life in the Lord reaps one benefit, the one who doesn't reaps judgment.
Okay.
Which is, and in Aristotle's concept, that would fit. Yeah. In his concept.
And because this is probably going on and on, would you do us a favor and close this out with what we just talked about before, the word God and the word goodness?
Oh yeah, in the Bible, the word God and the word good are linked in the Old Testament, New Testament. It's more strongly emphasized in the New Testament when the word for God, when it says God is good, it uses the Greek word agathos. And then when it talks about the goodness of God referring to his blessings on us, use the words agathos. And when it says in Romans 8:28 that no matter what problems we're facing in life, all things are working together for good to them who love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. And that word is agathos. And the important thing to recognize, the same thing that Aristotle talks about here, is the good that takes place in our life is not necessarily painless. It's not necessarily without its problems and difficulty, but it deals more with how we handle them in relationship to the Lord. So if Aristotle is talking to us, I think he would be saying that once you have developed an ethic package, the virtue concept, once you have developed that, if you follow that, regardless of the problems you face, you're going to end up with doing what's right, and you're going to be having happiness. So the Aristotelian concept is very close to the biblical concept, I think.
That's well said. So the package. The virtue package. I like that.
Yeah, so when you get a chance, read Proverbs 31,
All right.
and you'll see when it talks about a virtuous woman, it's not just talking about someone who's sexually pure. It's all these multifaceted things that she does. The chief characteristic of that virtue, and I think I haven't read far enough to see if Aristotle agrees with it, the chief characteristic of that woman's virtue is her unselfishness.
This is all very interesting. And if you go back to Lao Tzu with the Tao,
Mm-hmm.
which I think may be the oldest thing ever written, whenever the heck that was written, I don't even know. It was written a long time ago, and it probably wasn't written by Lao Tzu. It's probably, they don't even know if he was a real person. But the point that's being made is that, yeah, I'm writing this about the way to live according to the Tao, the way the ancients used to live. And I was like, the ancients? And what that meant was, if you are one with the Tao, the force, if you're one with the Tao, you will know what's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And you will do it, and you will not take pleasure in it or talk about yourself. You'll just do it and move on.
Yeah, and that's the scriptural concept. Your relationship to Christ, you will know. Somebody won't have to tell you.
Yep.
Like that.
So,
Well, it's been great today. Looking
All
forward to. We're going to do number 4 later. This is number 3.
I guess so. We'll
What is
see.
it? We'll
If
see
we
how
have the
it-
same shirts on, we just did it right away. And also, I should mention this thing. I have to get the name of this Jesuit priest who wrote this. It's the Teaching Company published it in 2001, and you can get a CD set. It's a very good company, and I'll get his name. He's from Fordham. So I apologize if you're still around.
Mm-hmm.
Let's call this a day.
Call it a day.
I'll get
Okay.
it.
You get it?
Oh, good. I can cut that out. Can you?